Thank you for joining us today. I'm Beth Lewis, and my colleague Wendy Smith and I will introduce ourselves shortly. And we'll have an opportunity to do some introductions. We're kind of a small group today, and that's okay. We really appreciate you being with us and your commitment to this particular issue. And so I'm going to go ahead and get some slides started here, and then we'll be off. Um, so I'm going to go ahead and hopefully this works. Okay. Hopefully people can see my screen. Perfect. All right. So we are going to talk today about conducting ethical research with LGBTQIA plus participants in STEM education. And we want to thank NARST for hosting this particular event. We very much appreciate the time and opportunity to share our work. And this is out of a project that we'll tell you a little bit more about in just a minute or so. And so today we are we are in for about 3 hours here today, and so we appreciate your time and your commitment. We will take a break in about an hour and a half's time, and give ourselves a chance to stretch and do any sort of bio breaks that we might need to do and take care of ourselves. So, just to let you know, the session is being recorded, but not the breakout rooms. So, again, we invite you, this is a small group, if you feel comfortable to have your camera on, but if you don't, that's okay too. So, again, we're going to do some quick orienting to knowledge about queer students in STEM, and then we're going to do some introductions and community agreements, and then we'll have an orienting activity. We'll discuss some definitions and terminology. And then most of the session is going to be small group activities. So we'll have lots of opportunities to discuss these ethical scenarios that we have for you today that talk about different parts of the research process and how we want to make sure that we are being ethical in our treatment of our participants throughout the whole research process. And then we'll hopefully have some time to get to a point where we can have you do some writing of your own to think about how you will apply the content to your existing research. So that's the plan for today. And we will, I'm going to turn things over here to my colleague, Wendy.
Yeah. So, what do you know about queer students in STEM? Uh, we have kind of some different facts and figures from the research literature, which may or may not surprise you. Beth, do you want to kind of just click through these to get them to show up here? Yeah. So K-12 mathematics classes have the lowest percentage of students, under 5%, reporting positive portrayals of queer people. Um, But then we're at 99%. Pretty sure it's actually closer to 100% of queer spectrum youth have heard phrases such as "that's so gay" in school or other kind of derogatory uses of queer terms. Uh, we know from a lot of research there's different math and science course participation patterns in high school for queer youth. They are less likely to be in the whatever, advanced or AP kind of things, or take more year, take 4 years of science rather than the minimum. Um, Queer students perceive educational environments to be hostile, and that's from elementary, middle school, high school, college. Lots of citations there. Other research has showed that when somebody is a queer boy or queer male, they're 47% less likely to take any advanced math and science courses. When we're looking at undergrads, we know that undergrads already switch away from intended STEM majors around 15 to 25%, depending on which exact area that is. But then if somebody's queer, they're 7 to 10% more likely to switch away from an intended STEM major. Um, there's a lot of perceived irrelevance of STEM to people's queer identities, and when people feel like they can't be their whole selves or bring themselves to the work, of STEM or STEM education that is something that makes people feel excluded rather than included. And we know that there are different levels of comfort for being out in STEM, whether people are students, faculty, or other professionals. So we had a grant called Prismatic 2, which followed a Prismatic 1, which was a conference grant. And so the purpose of this project was to engage researchers in trying to learn about advancing ethical and responsible human subjects research. And we specifically focused on minoritized individuals and communities in STEM, and specifically the LGBTQIA plus community. This was one of the grants that was targeted by DOGE. You may not be surprised at that. So we do not have funding, but we are still giving our messages. So we have learning objectives here. So the learning objectives for today are increased sensitivity and awareness, thinking about some of the unique challenges and vulnerabilities faced by LGBTQIA plus individuals and communities in research settings, thinking about intersectional identities and the different potential for harm, bias, um, and misrepresentation across the entire research cycle. We're hoping for enhanced ethical decision making. To think about a lot of our session workshop today will be different scenarios to engage with ethical issues across the research process, and then to think about strategies for how to address these kinds of scenarios. And the scenarios are all based in fact. They're often, condensed to fit on one slide, but these are all coming from real issues that people have shared with us. We'll talk a little bit about understanding of regulatory and oversight, such as IRB and ethics, and how to navigate different kinds of regulations and guidelines for protecting people, thinking about power dynamics. And then our last learning objective is, hoping to equip you as advocates for change, to think about how to advocate for greater representation and inclusion of LGBTQIA plus communities in research and academia, for challenging the system, addressing systemic biases, kinds of things. One of the things we have in these is across these slides, we'll have several, they're all kind of a blue background slide that feature different LGBTQIA plus STEM individuals who are, somewhat famous or some not so famous. So one of them, this first one, is Dr. Sally Ride. Sally Ride had a BS in physics and a BA in English from Stanford back in 1973. She did graduate work and got a master's and doctorate in physics by 1978. She'd answered an ad for NASA looking for young scientists to be mission specialists, and was one of only 5 women selected in that first NASA class of 1978. She was the first woman in space, the youngest American in space at that time, also the first out astronaut in terms of somebody identifying in the LGBTQIA plus community. However, Dr. Ride experienced plenty of sexism. Other people were asked about different kinds of things they were looking forward to scientifically, and rather than asking her about physics, she was asked things about, her ability to reproduce and what kind of makeup she was going to take into the mission. So yeah, she said, it's too bad this is still such a big deal. It's too bad our society isn't further along. I wish I could say we're much farther along now, but women still get those same kinds of questions. Like, let's talk about science. Like, no, what kind of makeup do you have on the space station?
Yes, indeed. All right. So we'd like to go ahead and invite you to share as much of the following as you're comfortable sharing. So we have had to add back in our pronouns because our university has actually stripped out pronouns from our Zoom. So we have added back our pronouns, and you are welcome to call us Beth and Wendy. Please don't hesitate. Again, this is a small group, so don't hesitate to ask questions. But we would love to hear from you while we aren't doing any kind of formal evaluation of this particular session. We very much would like to know what your goals are for attending this workshop, what you're hoping to get out of our time together. And then we'd love to know a fun fact about you. So I'll go ahead and stop sharing just for a second here. and we'll just give you a few minutes to do those things. Yeah, these are great things. So yeah, so Wendy and I both have spent quite a bit of time at the University of Nebraska Lincoln. Um, uh, we're it hasn't been quite 20 years for me, but Wendy, it's been maybe a minute for you.
Yeah, I first took a faculty position here in 2008, so it's approaching 20 years.
Yeah, yeah, I came the year after. So I'm in science education, professor in the Department of Teaching, Learning, and Teacher Education. I am proud mentor to about 100 graduate students, so I've really enjoyed working with graduate students, and I have been a longtime member of the NARS community and love all the time that I spend at conferences meeting people from around the world. So, Wendy, you have a kind of a new role. You might want to tell people about your
Yeah.
old role too.
Yeah, my background is actually in mathematics education, but for many years I was in our Center for Science, Math, and Computer Education, where I did a lot of STEM education research. And then more recently, just in January, I became the director of our Center for Transformative Teaching, which is the name of our teaching and learning center. So I've been getting to think about teaching across all the disciplines now, not just STEM, which has been very interesting to see what's the same and what's different. And there's much more that's the same than might be different.
Yeah. Yeah, and Wendy and I both have also been PIs of multiple noise grants and also from NSF. So we've done a lot of research. Wendy has done a wide range of research with STEM and leadership. And we currently have a grant that also focuses on science education and leadership. So all kinds of good fun things. But there are a lot of questions that we have that we are encountering when we do research, and we are really looking forward to the conversations we're going to have with you today. So, all right. Well, without further ado, let me get the slides back on. Again, we're eager to create community with you in amongst our short time together. So again, here's another one of our spotlights, and this one is from Ben Barres. And the quote that we have from him is, "I live life on my terms. I wanted to switch genders, and I did. I wanted to be a scientist, and I was. I wanted to study glia, and I did that too. I stood up for what I believed in, and I like to think that I made an impact, or at least opened the door for impact to occur. I have zero regrets, and I'm ready to die. I've truly had a great life." And unfortunately, Dr. Barres had passed away of pancreatic cancer, I believe. And so, but during his career, he was a pioneering neurobiologist at Stanford and did work on a type of brain cells called glia, which revolutionized our understanding of the brain. And in 2013, became the first openly transgender member elected to the U.S. National Academy of Sciences. So, and that's an organization that has in the past included many of the United States leading scientists. Obviously, we're dealing with some fraught times at the moment. Okay, back to you, Wendy.
Yes. So one of the things when we do this kind of workshop, and actually when we do any kind of workshop, we always like to go through some community agreements. If this were a multi-day workshop and we had some more hours, we would develop these together. But since we're just here for a relatively short amount of time, we're just going to propose these community agreements and ask people to adhere to them. That we are here to learn from each other through discussions about ethical research considerations involving LGBTQIA plus communities. We're not here to debate the legitimacy of LGBTQIA plus individuals and their identities, nor are we going to debate the need for vigilance and intentionality for ethical inclusion of LGBTQIA plus individuals in STEM education research. That link to the code of conduct is something that the National Science Foundation had asked us to include, and we don't anticipate needing to remove anybody, but we're not going to we're not going to debate those kind of things. We'll be having other discussions instead. And then just thinking about, as we work together, we ask you to all to think about encouraging others to participate, asking others if they want to comment or add to your contributions, either out loud or in the chat, invite in people who maybe have been quiet, recognizing the value of having, understanding, and using shared terms, asking people to be active listeners and engage with ideas that you're agreeing or disagreeing with, not necessarily people. So we're disagreeing with ideas and not a person sometimes. And then having conversations, trying to listen to understand, which is as opposed to thinking about just listening while you're trying to think about a response to someone else. So trying to really hear what other people are saying. And then thinking about this is perhaps opening up some areas that we're asking people to be vulnerable. And so thinking about, we might be taking risks, recognize that there are some very complex contexts happening, and being willing to contribute even if we're unsure. To acknowledge everyone here is coming in with good intentions, but it's also okay to point out if there's an ouch moment of a microaggression, and that we ask that personal stories stay, but lessons learned can go with us. So not to retell any personal stories that are shared in this space, and to just also think about telling your own stories and perspectives and not just bringing in other people's stories.
Okay. Thank you, Wendy. And please don't hesitate to let us know if you have any questions. And we could certainly pause here for a moment if there's any questions or concerns that we can respond to. Okay. Again, just don't hesitate to direct message us. We're very happy to respond to any concerns that you might have. And again, we will not be recording the breakout sessions. We want you to feel like you can speak freely and comfortably in those sessions. So, okay. So our first activity. We're doing an orienting activity, um, and before we launch into these different scenarios, and we just want to get into the space and thinking about, you know, conducting research in STEM. So thinking about your own experiences, and describing those. These can be briefly. You can just take this is an independent activity. Will take about 10 minutes. And if you want to open up a file and take some notes for yourself, again, just write out what might be comfortable for you. It doesn't have to be, no one's getting graded for this. So feel free to to just kind of have some free-flowing ideas. But we'd really like you to also think about, what are some procedures or safeguards in a typical study that protect the confidentiality of participants or that represent ethical and responsible research conduct. And then thinking about your own familiarity with acronyms and queer communities that are included in these terms, thinking about studies that involve LGBTQIA plus individuals. Can you think of additional safeguards that might be called for across the research cycle? And again, we appreciate you sharing your goals. So, you can just kind of whatever you typed in the chat, you can just pop that right into your own notes. But so we'll go ahead and leave this up, but we'll also put about 10 minutes on a timer here, and we'll just be quiet and let people do some reflection and writing. And Wendy has just a reminder that Wendy has also given you the link to the slides. And so if it's easiest, you can certainly go into this particular slide and copy and paste the questions into a separate file for yourself. Take another 5 minutes, and it's entirely up to you if you want to share what you've written or not. You're in control. Thank you again for sharing your perspectives and your experiences with us. We really appreciate it. And um, we hope that you feel like this is a safe space to be in and where we can learn from each other. Okay. Um, yes. So we do want to attend to some of the definitions and terminology. We appreciate the fact that we have a very international group here and things are different in different places. So we have another highlight here. And so history isn't something that you look back at and say it was inevitable. It happens because people make decisions that are sometimes very impulsive and of the moment, but those moments are cumulative realities. So, Marsha P. Johnson was an American gay liberation activist and self-identified drag queen. Known as an outspoken advocate for gay rights, Johnson was one of the prominent figures in the Stonewall Uprising of 1969. So, people have been advocating for a long time. It happens to be the year I was born. So, I appreciate Marsha and the work that they had done. So. All right.
Okay, so just a few definitions. So we're kind of on the same page in terms of words we're going to be using. So gender identity is somebody's internal sense of self that can be the same or different from sex assigned at birth. A person's sexual orientation or sexual identity is somebody's enduring physical, romantic, or emotional attraction to another person. And the words that tend to describe sexual orientation are things like lesbian, gay, bisexual, queer, straight, or asexual. We will use LGBTQIA plus as an acronym to stand for lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, queer, intersex, asexual, and non-binary with the plus sign, recognizing that there are limitless sexual orientations and gender identities people have. I know in some countries there's a 2S, meaning two spirit in that, and that for ours certainly is encompassed in the plus. Some people might be using that, and that's great. And then if we refer to BIPOC, for the United States, that stands as Black, Indigenous, or people of color. And then on the next slide,
I just wanted to stop and pause and see if people had any questions. And again, maybe the not sharing the slides is a friendlier way if people want to ask anything. We don't want to just restrict you to the chat. Again, this is a small group, and so if people have any questions, this is a good time to ask questions.
I put my question in the chat, but I can also vocalize it a little bit. I don't know if it's planned in part of your future prompts, but is it ever appropriate to give study participants the choice to be named rather than using a pseudonym, if they opt in to doing so? And like, are there some like serious concerns that we should think about in giving participants that choice?
I mean, definitely if you're letting people opt in, that's always a good kind of option. And yes, some people would be very comfortable with being named, and other people would not. So as long as there's an option for people to also opt out and have pseudonyms, that is fine. I mean, thinking about um, if you let people opt in and use names, like if later they want to use a different name or have different pronouns, do you then have a mechanism to go back and change the record? That would be one consideration.
Yeah, and I would just pitch in too. It sort of depends on the context of your study as well. So if people are activists or if they're on social media, so one of my um, uh, doctoral students who just graduated recently, Dr. Rachel Benzoni. She and I just presented at NARS this spring. And she presented her work as well, her dissertation work, and she was looking at science teacher leaders on TikTok. And so for them, she had three participants, and two of them decided that they wanted to use their real name because their stuff was out there already, and they were like, "Yep, that's fine." And then one decided that she did want to have a pseudonym, and that was fine too. So Rachel was very careful to make sure that she anonymized everything sufficiently. And yeah, could someone go in and try to find them? Yeah, okay, sure. But that was a very particular type of study as well. And so if you're using social media as an artifact, then it could get complicated, right? Because some parts are people are very public and some parts of the participant might not be. Okay.
Yeah, so another STEM spotlight is on James Baldwin, who was not actually necessarily from STEM, but was an American writer, essayist, activist, but did a lot of inclusive work about race, identity, social justice. He wrote novels, gave speeches to confront systemic racism, sexuality, and human dignity. And one of his kind of famous quotations is, "Neither love nor terror makes one blind, indifference makes one blind." So he was very much on the activist side of pushing people to take a stand and stand up for each other. And then, we did some kind of went through some community agreements, but just here's also some baseline facts that we use kind of as for the rest of these scenarios, is that all research that involves humans, period, necessarily includes people with minoritized identity, whether that is gender, sexuality, or anything else. If you're doing research with people, you're doing research with LGBTQIA plus people, whether you know it or not. People who are in the LGBTQIA plus community spend time and energy assessing their personal safety and potential consequences from disclosing their identities in every situation. And if that sounds exhausting, it is. There are real implications for potential harm and danger from breaches in research confidentiality, particularly for LGBTQIA plus individuals. And knowing that we're here, with an international audience, like in some countries, there are still aspects of sexuality that are deemed illegal. And so then there are, very, very real harm and danger. In the United States, some state legislatures have been trying to grab up research data to identify trans people, to put them on a list that we don't know what's going to happen with the list, but it doesn't seem good. So thinking like the potential harms are very real. And that responsible conduct of research needs to span the entire process, from the design and planning, recruitment, instruments, data collection, data analysis, propagation, confidentiality, and that all researchers are responsible for ethical practices. Another spotlight is Audre Lorde, who described herself as Black, lesbian, mother, warrior, poet. She was a writer, and she often talked about the anger she had over the treatment of people of color, women, LGBTQ folk, and talked about demanding the acceptance and respect that is your right. She said things like, "If I didn't define myself for myself, I would be crunched into other people's fantasies for me and eaten alive. And I am not free while any woman is unfree, even when her shackles are very different from my own." All right, so for a lot of this workshop, we're going to have a set of scenarios. Like I said, these scenarios are all real. In some cases, they were shortened just to fit on a slide or be clear. Any of them that use names are using pseudonyms. In some sense, because these all happened, like toward the end, if you want to ask, like what actually, well, like not what is the right answer, because there's not one right answer to these scenarios, but if you want to know what actually happened with some of these, we can fill you in on that. Um, and so for all of the scenarios, and we'll be repeating this, we have this on several slides. As you look at each scenario, the questions are, what are the ethical issues at play? What are the potential consequences for researchers, for research participants, or other people involved? Who might be harmed? Who might stand to benefit? What are some possible actions, solutions, or responses? Are there ways that context influences the scenario or the solution, and would a different context matter? We've been given some of these workshops just to people in the US, but I think also just international context. If you're in a country with particular laws, how might that change things? What are implications for people with multiple and intersecting identities? And then do you actually have any resources that might, or know people who have specific expertise to share in this area? And if you don't, that's fine. But one of the things we like to do is share the knowledge and share what we know. And I also pasted those in the chat, so you'll be able to see those. Okay, and so I think, given the number, I think we'll just open up two small groups. And for this first scenario, we're giving both of you the same scenario, although in later ones you'll get a chance to select different scenarios. This one is about community membership and token representation. Do people want to just look at it on the slide, or want to, like, I'm happy to read it out loud, but also I don't have to read out loud if you're just looking at it right there. I think I'll go ahead and just kind of paste it in the chat, so that way once you go into the small group, you'll be able to see in the chat the questions and the scenario. Yeah. All right. Beth, are you about to open rooms or do you want me to open rooms? I've got them kind of queued up over here, but
Yeah, why don't you go ahead?
okay. So we're going to open the rooms and give you about 8 or 10 minutes here to discuss. And then we'll come back and like Beth said earlier, the small groups are not being recorded. So please feel free to say what you want to say in there. And as we come back from each of these small groups, you'll have the option to share out. But if you don't want to share things from your discussion, that's also fine. And if you have any problem getting into the small group, let us know. There's some things we can do to try to push you into one of them.
Glad to see you. So, like we said, we're not recording the breakout rooms, and again, you being your camera on or off is entirely up to you. So we want you to feel comfortable in the space, but we're also happy to see your smiling faces. So, um, all good. And we'd like to welcome one more member to our workshop today. So welcome, Katya. So, all right. Any thoughts that people would like to share from this first scenario? What did you notice? What were some questions? So we have Taylor, who is not a member of the LGBTQIA plus community, but does research. Um, what are our thoughts about these colleagues' opinions? Should Taylor be doing research on a community to which he does not belong? Ryan,
I didn't know if this was a raise hand situation or not.
feel free. Feel free.
So Alexis and I were talking about how this is very dependent specifically on Taylor, on the context, the specific kind of research, because perhaps Taylor is, as Alexis said, like is an ally and is well informed and knows how to conduct the research ethically. But given the second part of the prompt, perhaps not. Um, and it also could depend on the what field they're conducting it in, what the institution context is, what the national or geographic context is, because if it is somewhere where the community historically and or currently has experienced a lot of like oppression, then it becomes even more important to have a member of the community there to have that perspective. But if it is a magical subject where there's like perfect representation or something like that, then that becomes less important. There can be a benefit to being an outsider sometimes in sort of research applications. So question mark on the first one was what we decided.
Yeah, thank you. Those are it's a nuanced situation, right? And I think there is a lot of nuance that can be present. And so these are all great questions to be asking. And yeah, thank you for sharing. Um, and so what about the second part? Do we have some thoughts about the grant proposal? And and then the team is, thinking about having at least one queer researcher, but it's the timing, right? So asking Devin a few days before the proposal. So what's the situation that Devin might be experiencing here?
Hi, Alexis here. Yeah, so ethically, I would say it's not the best approach because it might trigger some distress to the person. It's like, am I being used for this researcher? What's my insight in this study? This person just want to publish and just want to use me so it has more chances to get bread application pass because I'm part of the LGBT community, but it's not about enriching the study and helping the community.
Yeah, we talked a bit about tokenism, possibly because of the timing, and the fact that it's like not really clear why Taylor's interested in doing this research. Like motivation is important. If you're not a part of the community, what is it that you're trying to get out of it? Is it just because it's like you think you can get a publication out of it? Is that extractivism? So we said we were also on the idea that like the timing kind of makes it a bit iffy, right? Like something's going on.
Yes, thank you. These are important considerations. What other thoughts might people have about this situation? Okay.
Would it be
Oh,
okay if I weighed in without having been in any of the breakout groups? I just had a couple of things that came to mind. One was, and again, it depends on all these nuances that people mentioned, but we don't normally require that the researcher belongs to the group they research. Like, do we need to have a high school student on the team if we're researching high school students? You know what I mean? Um, but then again, there's, other things going on here. And then as far as Devin goes, whether I don't know, it kind of depends on where he is in the tenure process. Maybe maybe having another paper would be good for him, even if they were kind of pulling him in at the last minute. And presumably he would have less work to do since they're pulling him in at the last minute. I don't know. That might be a plus for him, might not, but those are just my random thoughts anyway.
thank you. I think we'll go ahead and we're going to split people out into one more breakout room. So we're adding a breakout room, and then so we're going to divide the larger group and add in Kaja. And what we'd like you to do is to go ahead and choose a scenario. So we have scenarios, 6 of them, and so you can pick whichever one appeals to you, and then you'll see this as you go through. But yes, so here are the slides again. Thank you, Wendy. And then you can pick any one of these. We were, potentially going to assign them so that people had different ones, but really, with just 3 groups, if we'd like you to just kind of look at the topics and then see which one appeals to you. And if you have time, we're going to give you I think maybe 10 to 15 minutes. Yeah. And so you might get through one and be like, we're done with that one. And then feel free to pick another one. So again, we want you to use your own interests to kind of guide, but do try to pick relatively quickly because 15 minutes is not very long. So but we're going to go ahead and put you in groups. And also we wanted to mention, we should have said before, like we're going to just sort of stay in the main session. You can always call for us if you need it. It's kind of like making wishes. So we can pop in. It's like rubbing a lantern. We're your genies and we will pop in magically into your session. But just don't hesitate to call us if you have any questions, if we can be of assistance. But we're not going to just pop in. And again, we're not recording the breakout rooms. Okay. So.
Okay, so I linked to the scenario so you can just open the document and be reading through to pick, and then I repasted. We have the same questions for these new scenarios, even though the scenarios are different. So I'll go ahead and open the rooms now.
Yeah.
If you have any trouble moving into the breakout rooms, let us know and we'll see if we can nudge things on our side. All right, welcome back, everybody. We wanted to give groups a chance to share whatever you wanted to share from your discussion. And so we're not going to call on your groups in order, but if you want to talk about, just mention one of the scenarios that you discussed, go ahead and give us the quick recap 10-second recap of what that one was about and things that you came up with for suggestions, or any, tensions you identified or questions that you have about the scenarios you talked about. And you can feel free to unmute and say something. You can type something in the chat, whichever you prefer.
So I'm sorry that my camera is not working, but we selected scenario number 3, and I think we had more questions than answers for the discussion. So I think I would like to start by asking, because I wouldn't think that I would have to tell the IRB about the incident of the posters being damaged, because I really haven't recruited any participants. So it would be like another office. I would maybe report that, not the IRB, or how, yeah. I'm just confused about that part.
Yeah, so that's a very good question. Because it's unclear who was the one who damaged and defaced the posters, the IRB would want to know, because in some sense, you could argue that this is a changing to the amount of risk it is for people to participate, since there's this open hostility. I will say this thing actually happened at the University of Nebraska-Lincoln, where I am, and this wasn't me, but I knew the person who did this. Yeah, and so they ended up needing to they changed the recruitment strategy, and so that had to be approved by the IRB, because their previous one was, I'm going to put these posters up, people will sign up, and then they changed that strategy. So they had to get that approved as a different research mechanism than what had been approved on their original IRB.
And I don't know what the actual people ended up doing, but what I suggested was trying to recruit people by email. Like if you could get on a listserv of a group that would include possible research participants, and then they could decide if they want to respond or something like that. Just based on my, nothing to do with this topic, but trying to recruit from a small group. That's how I approached it when I did my dissertation. So I think that might be a way of doing that could be successful and would be less likely to invite hostile responses,
Mhm.
which, wow. So that's an actual thing that happened. Wow.
Yeah, all of these scenarios are actual things that actually happened. We've changed, their pseudonyms. I mean, I told you this one happened at UNL, but, knowing that it was at UNL doesn't actually change the thing. So, we simplified each one enough so that it could fit on a slide, but these are all real things that have happened.
So then what recruitment method did they end up using?
This person ended up going to the computer science classes and kind of just sharing in 2 minutes about their study, and then saying, email me to sign up to be part of the study, since they were looking for computer science students.
We had also talked about that an issue with posters, even if they're not defaced, could be that if someone is seen scanning a QR code from them, taking a picture, and the poster is explicitly looking for LGBT participants, then that could create kind of a vector of harassment from their peers. So another benefit for email.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a really good point. And definitely I would say, like, advice I give to grad students now is, like, don't put up posters. Figure out ways to either go talk to people in person where you're talking to classes, or if you can get a hold of an email list, or something like that, or a student club, something where you're talking to people in person, giving them a private way to contact you or not, and that kind of thing.
It's okay if I say something else quick. One other thing we talked about on scenario 3 was that in those situations where a participant doesn't is offended by a question, or doesn't want to answer it, you can try pivoting it, and rebuild trust of I'm really sorry about that. Thank you for letting me know. Is there a way that you would want to share? Well, how do you want to share your experience about this particular thing? So there are productive ways to deal with that.
Yes. Absolutely.
Yeah, and also about that, when I write informed consents, usually I include a statement like you can always withdraw from the study and reach me if you want to remove something. Or in some cases, some researchers share the data with participants so they can skim the comments and check that the interview is transcribed properly and everything, or you can just delete it later.
Yep. And in some cases, we share the questions in advance and say, here are the interview questions we're planning to ask. If you have any questions about these or, feedback, let us know now or let us know at the start of the interview.
Mhm.
Yeah, all of those are great strategies.
Well, and it would depend on the particular procedure for your IRB, but what I shared was that when I wrote mine, I will ask questions like, and then I put them, because what I found with one of my studies was there was a major thing that I needed to ask about that I didn't think about till after I analyzed the pilot. And so I didn't have to go back through IRB again. I could just target that aspect. So, um, but then Alexis was saying his IRB wants every single question. So I guess it would depend on your institution. But if your institution allows it, that would be my suggestion. I will ask questions such as and give the list of what you have so far.
Yeah, I think a lot of IRBs do want to see the whole list. Sometimes I've gotten away with saying things like, we're focused on people's, science identity as a learner and as, thinking about science careers. And so we might ask probing questions in that, narrow domain. And that sometimes work, but sometimes we do just have to submit the exact questions we plan to ask. Yeah. Thank you for sharing. Looking at the time, we had promised that about 90 minutes in, and we started kind of 5 minutes after the hour when we first started, that we would have a break. So we're going to take a break for 10 minutes and come back at 10 minutes after the hour. I think if you want to just leave Zoom open, but just, turn off your camera, mute yourself, we will pop back in 10 minutes. Welcome back, everyone.
And just a quick note in the chat, if you would please tell us, we're curious which scenarios you gravitated towards. And so if you could just tell us which ones you picked. Maybe it was just one, and that's totally fine. Um, ooh, ambitious group almost got to three. Just giving you a little more time. Awesome. Three, yeah, okay. Three is very popular. Interesting. Okay. Do people want to say anything? We do have time. Um, and we really love to hear from you all what you discussed. We could take another couple minutes here, and Wendy can, as she has been sort of filling you in on like these real ripped from the headlines, as it were, scenarios. Yes. So, um, would anyone be willing to talk about another scenario? And I can always find the right slide and flash that up too. It looks like so five, just to share that one. So this was the pre-existing data sets.
Yeah, so in that one, because there was a contract signed and that contract was like tied to job expectations, they went ahead and did the analysis, and then did not bid on getting that industry contract in the future. And then they also put a kind of fairly big disclaimer about, a major limitation is that anything, related to gender was not, was incomplete. And I believe they did not include any gender distinctions in the analysis that they did, and just said, since the data wasn't, had a lot of missing information, it's not appropriate to split by that.
Yeah, thank you, Wendy. Do people want to share any thoughts about what you discussed?
I guess on that one, we thought it was problematic to try to infer gender from biological sex reported data, and that if anything, that would do more harm than offer insight. And so, like we had thought that we would not break the data down by that variable. Yeah.
Yep, exactly.
And it looks like we'd like to have some more information about number 4. So let me share number 4 for us, which is about interview data and identity.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, if a participant asks, don't include my data from this, then we're bound to honor that. And so, to not include that data. And then thinking about being too identifiable, that is a real concern. And so thinking about, so using a pseudonym is a very typical process in a research study like this. But sometimes what you need to do is use pseudonyms for more and mask more. So instead of saying, oh, this person was, a graduate student in the electrical engineering department who is Black, it's like, okay, well, even if you give that person a pseudonym, that might actually not be enough to mask their identity. And so the person did more. So instead of naming the department, talked about it as like a STEM department. So they kind of masked more than just the person's name with that, to help with but then they also talked to the person about, would this, if I do it this way, does that feel safe enough to you? And got, and was trying to do it in ways that would protect the participant, and got to something that the participant was very comfortable with. Yeah, and the comment in the chat, that's right. Like anytime things are, being asked about sex or gender, when there are only binary categories, which is sometimes the case for government documents, then doing any kind of disaggregated analysis along gender or sex has a lot of incorrect data in it, because it's, forcing people into false binaries. It is actually the case, like in Nebraska, so starting in 2021, they added a third category, and then last fall they took it away. But our state is one of the ones whose legislatures is trying to get access to research data to make a list of trans people. So even though I think it's very problematic to jump back to having a binary, it's also the safer option right now for trans people and other people who don't want to be outed by the government, which is, it's not the situation I thought we were going to be in 2026, but here we are.
Yeah, exactly. We're going to loop back. We have kind of these 2 other ones, and so we will kind of pick up this scenario 7 and 8 because we do have time. We have time today, so we're doing great. And I'm going to kind of pop back and you were on a good discussion roll, so we wanted to keep that going. But we do want to talk about the Belmont report, and just briefly, and talk about how our project has worked to sort of work on querying that. So hopefully in your human subjects trainings, you have encountered the Belmont report, but if not, that's okay. We'll give you the broad strokes, and then there's some additional information that you might want to seek out if that's the case. So let me go ahead and grab those slides. Okay, and then, all right. So our basic ethical principles that we are concerned with in the Belmont report is respect for persons. And so obviously when we're doing research with people, we need to respect the intrinsic value and autonomy of individuals when they're engaging in our research. As we've been discussing, individuals should be treated as autonomous agents and capable of making their own decisions about whether or not to participate in research. And so, when we're asking people for their consent, we would need to make sure that that's informed and that they understand the scope of the research that we're trying to do. Make sure that they really understand that, and then make sure that they also understand that they have the option to withdraw from the study at any particular time, no matter how inconvenient that might be for us. It's important that they know that they have a choice. And then we also want to make sure that people who might be at risk, that we are providing protection with people who might have diminished autonomy. So young kids, individuals with intellectual disabilities are very much entitled to protection. And so we need to ensure that the protection involves safeguarding their well-being and ensuring that their rights are not compromised. The beneficence is another piece of the Belmont report and emphasizing the researcher's obligation to maximize benefits and minimize harm. So again, like other doctors, we don't want to do any harm, do no harm, protecting our participants from any physical, psychological, social, or economic harm. And all these areas are very much important, and there's no one that's more important than the other. But we really want to make sure, in this particular case, we're being very careful. And that we also want to make sure that the research isn't being done just for research sake, that the potential benefits of the research are outweighing the risks for participants and society. And justice. We also want to make sure that there's a fair distribution of the burdens and benefits. We don't want to ever have a participant who's going to be, that the burden is skewed more to them. So we want to make sure that our selections are equitable and that they're not being selected based on convenience, vulnerability, or social marginalization, that we're treating our participants fairly and equitably, regardless of their background or social status. So these three principles are really providing that solid framework for ethical decision making and research, and gives us some guidance on how we conduct our studies that are respectful and beneficial. Sorry, words, and just for all participants. So what our project endeavored to do was to take a look at this and work on querying the Belmont report. And there are certainly other ways that one might do this, but this is where we landed. And so again, when we're thinking about working with LGBTQIA plus communities, we want to be reflective and think about these things. So taking these three categories, and thinking about when we're designing studies, how can we promote the decision making and autonomy of queer individuals within the research? How are they being represented? How is the research framed and the motivations being presented to the participants? Because that's going to be really important, and people need to feel like they are being respected. Otherwise, they're not going to want to be part of our research, and why should they? In terms of beneficence, breaches of confidentiality, as we've discussed already, have a high potential for real harm and danger to queer participants. So we really want to think carefully about how we protect queer participants from psychological and social harm, especially during these times of increased public attacks, as like Wendy's been pointing out, even in our this new world that we're navigating, and spaces where we thought we were doing better, right? But we're unfortunately seeing the pendulum swing. And then what benefits? So it's there's other kinds of benefits other than financial that we can be providing to queer individuals in our research. And so we want to think about those things carefully. And then also, in terms of justice, how are we attending to people's unique experiences, even when not central to the research focus? And how do we ensure that we're not erasing identities from research findings? And this is one thing that you all have already pointed out too. So really appreciate you recognizing that. When we think about applying these principles to research, we have some common themes. So obviously, within the umbrella of critical theories and social justice, we have issues of power dynamics. And certainly one of those power dynamics is between a research and a participant. There are those power dynamics between those who hold privilege in their gender and or sexuality when studying individuals with a marginalized gender identity or sexual identity. We want to think carefully about research with versus research on. And doing research on a population invokes ideas of animal studies and other outsider research that may dehumanize them. So this stands in real contrast to doing research with a population as partners in the research. And that's something I think that's very important. It's an easy thing to keep reminding ourselves if we think like with and not for, with and not on. And that's something that I feel keeps me grounded when I'm thinking about this kind of work. The diversity of LGBTQIA plus communities, no one person is going to represent everyone within the gender and sexuality spectrum, or will necessarily be an expert. So, for example, don't assume that a community leader speaks for the entire community. There's still just one individual with unique life experiences. And so, and we've kind of alluded to this already, but people's identities as LGBTQIA plus, queer or not, and their non-disclosure or disclosure can change over time. So identity and self-identification fluctuate over time and context. And so we have to be really careful that we're not assuming that just because someone does not currently identify as queer, that they've not held that identity previously or will not hold that identity in the future. So those are some things that we want to remind us on, and there's a couple more. Just to let me wrap this up. Just a few more things for food for thought here. Again, as Wendy was giving that example of like the Black engineer, queer engineer in a at a university, like okay, there's real re-identification risks. So we want to be really careful that we're providing shelter for that individual. And those are conversations that we can have with our participants too. So, and then making sure that throughout the research process that we have proper research alignment, and ensuring that the focus of the research question, the data collection, the analyses are all aligned and that additional data is not being collected without a clear intention for analysis. Um, we don't always do research that is dependent on knowing people's gender identities, and that's okay. And so if you don't need it, then don't collect it. We want to make sure that we're centering queer scholars. And this is one thing that I've been really pleased with. I think NARST is doing a great job at recognizing and providing awards to queer scholars within our community. And that's wonderful because they're fantastic role models and mentors within our community. And but making sure that all of us are being careful about the frameworks and instruments that are being developed within the queer community and properly attributing them, then we're raising the awareness and endorsing the research outcomes of queer and trans scholars. So all these things, there's a lot in here to think about, but again, our project wanted to think carefully about like, let's be really specific about how we want to apply the Belmont report. to our work. And so what I'd like to just stop there for a second and invite Wendy if she's got any other comments about this, because she led this project and she was the PI of the grant.
Yeah, just thinking, just having this attitude or lens of questioning assumptions, questioning why it is we do it things this way, thinking about care for persons and how to protect people in whatever political climate you're in right now. And yeah, my advice to people now is different than it was before 2024, but now it's often like, don't collect that data. If you're not going to be able to report on it, if you're not going to be able to keep it safe, then don't collect it. And the world is collectively missing out on a lot of things we could be understanding because we're not collecting data, but it's more important to protect people.
Thanks, Wendy. Do you want to do the next highlight?
Sure.
Okay, I will get that shared.
So some of the STEM spotlights we've been doing have been, I would say, people from the past. Now we have a few that are kind of from the present. So Kiana Wilson, her is an astrophysicist, writer, science communicator, and content creator. She describes herself as a Black, masculine presenting lesbian woman, thinks a lot about representation and how to use her voice, story, and knowledge and talent for representation and advocacy work, especially to help underrepresented groups in STEM fields see STEM as a possible career path. So she's a recent graduate at the University of Chicago, where she has degrees in astrophysics, minor in English creative writing, and she was a known scholar. She works as a cosmology research at the Argonne National Laboratory now, and has a lot of ongoing hobbies of martial arts, weightlifting, being outdoors, reading, watching shows, and documentaries with popcorn. And she was a plenary speaker. There's an organization called Out in STEM, and at the 2024 conference, she was one of the plenary speakers. All right, these same scenario questions are back because we have more scenarios. And let's see, I think these are the ones we already talked about. If you want to keep going on the slides, Beth. Yeah. Yep. Yeah, and then another current person, Matthew Welmers, him, is an analytical chemist for INX International Inc. Company and was the annual conference chair for the Out in STEM or OSTEM conference. So he thinks about being an analytical chemist, thinking about solving customer issues, doing quality control, assurance support for research and development. Some of his hobbies are being active in professional organizations, and yeah, he's been involved in OSTEM for over 10 years. He also likes restaurants, parks, bookstores in the greater Chicagoland area. So we had broken out, and I realized earlier when we said, oh, just pick one from any of these scenarios, we didn't specify that 7 and 8 are a little bit longer. So these are, I know, hard to read on a slide, which is why we shared them with you in the scenario text, and I'll reshare that in a moment. But thinking about looking at one of these two scenarios for another round. Let's see. Grabbing my links.
While Wendy's doing that, again, just feel free to pick one of the two of these, or if you have time, you could certainly talk about both, but I think we'll probably just do 10 minutes this time.
Yeah, 10 minutes.
10 minutes, yeah. We want to make sure that we're not running over time.
Yeah. I was just gonna find, it's the same research, it's the same questions as before. So let me just read, there they are. Have a lot of windows open. Okay, same questions. I will get the rooms opened up again. And yeah, 10 minutes.
All right. we'd love to hear from people what you talked about. So you picked either 7 or 8, and we've talked about some of these issues, but again, we would love to hear different perspectives and different experiences. And again, if your experiences in different countries, and the NARS community is very much an international organization, so we want to support you wherever you are. Um, what thoughts might you have? And I can certainly share the slides. So we have navigating identity and representation. What did you discuss here? And feel free to raise your hand or
We didn't talk about the additional considerations part, but just about the categories. And we thought maybe allowing participants room to articulate and elaborate what their categories are rather than having preformed slots to stick them into.
did anyone talk about the data analysis and the publication aspect?
Just along the same lines, just including those maybe newer, more nuanced categories that participants articulated in the research findings.
Mm-hmm.
Even if it was maybe you went into it not anticipating that category, including it in when you publish it, because that emerged during your data collection.
Yeah. Yeah. And I know people were interested in sort of the backstory about these scenarios too. So well, we can turn to Wendy as well.
Yeah, I mean, this was, in terms of what happened, they decided to, as participants, said that they had changes, then they went in and they asked people and they said, okay, so we're going to identify you this way in this year of data collection. Do you want us to change that for the last year or leave it as it was and let people make that determination? And in terms of protecting the identities, they went beyond just using pseudonyms, but they let people decide fully, if their department needed to be masked, if they needed to have other kinds of things to protect their identity. And they did get one of their articles. They were told that this research isn't any good because it's only looking at queer individuals and you didn't have a cisgender student comparison group. And I see several of your facial expressions, like I agree, and this was real feedback that they really got from reviewers, and that the editor of a journal reinforced by saying, you should consider collecting more data. And so then they crafted back a rebuttal letter saying respectfully no, like exploring the identities and experiences of a certain group of people does not require us to compare to others, and that comparing to cisgendered people as the norm perpetuates more stereotypes and saying this is the normal thing and now we're identifying the abnormal thing. Like this is not what we're doing. They ended up eventually just moving to a different journal that was willing to publish what they had. I wish we wish that, we wish the first journal could have been an option, but yeah, like having reviewers be educated also about ethical research considerations is a thing that nearly every journal does not do. And so then you get stuff where you get reviews back. It's like, this is not reasonable or appropriate.
Thanks, Wendy. How about scenario number 8? This is one that feels especially relevant. What are some thoughts? We'd love to hear from you about this.
We just very briefly talked about it, but the idea was to make, like, what could you have done during the initial study design? The suggestion was to make people anonymous immediately so that you didn't have a record of what their actual identities were. that could be gone back to by somebody.
Mhm.
But I kind of wonder about that one. It seems to me from the scenario that the university wasn't really required to ask for that particular data, given what the context was. And I thought it was a little weird that they threw those researchers under the bus. I know my institution has been trying to push back a little bit against our state legislature requiring certain things. But I don't know.
I will say this one happened very close to you. Since you mentioned where you are, like this one happened in South Carolina, not hypothetically. And the university's IRB did push back and say, we never agreed to share data with the legislature. At best, we could share some de-identified data that includes no indicators whatsoever. The particular person who we're calling Kai right here ended up not sharing their data at all. But they were also in the process of accepting a job in a different state. And so they decided, like, what are you going to do to me? Fire me? Like, I already quit. So, no, I'm not sharing my data.
Well, yay RRB on that one. That's great.
Any other thoughts before we move on? Okay. Go ahead and share one more highlight that we have. And before we go into our group scenario creation activities. So we are going back in time. We came forward in time and now we're going back in time a bit. And so we have Sarah Josephine Baker, known as Dr. Joe, was a pioneer in public health. She was instrumental in curbing the New York City typhoid outbreak of 1906. So Dr. Joe pioneered programs focused on disease prevention and education. She was passionate about developing public understanding of science and promoting safe childcare practices. She established the Federal Children's Bureau in 1909, and which revolutionized health and hygiene for children and improving infant mortality rates across the U.S. And it's estimated that she saved the lives of 90,000 children in New York alone and countless of others through promotion of sanitation and preventive medicine. So we can be very grateful. So, oh, very good. Okay, so Wendy, I'm going to pass it back to you.
Yeah, so one of the things we invite people to do in these workshops is to draft an individual or collective scenario, knowing that you're here because you're either interested in or have done research with people, and so you can think about what ethical scenarios might you encounter in your situations. And so what we're going to ask you to do is I put a document in the chat for drafting scenarios. It's blank. It just has, group 1, 2, 3 labeled on it. And so thinking about things you might include, like what's a little bit of the context in terms of what kind of data are you thinking about, what kind of methods, what kind of participants, what kind of discussion themes do you hope the scenario might elicit? What do you want people to focus on or talk about? Are there areas of caution or tension in this scenario? And do you have any evidence-based responses or suggestions for how people might discuss it? So with this one, we'll give you a little bit longer, about 20 minutes to kind of think through these things. I will also paste these questions in the chat so you'll be able to see them after you shift to the breakout rooms. And yeah, that is the task, and all the scenarios we had were 100% real life events. The scenario you come up with does not have to be. It can just be something you can envision happening to yourself or to other researchers, whatever kind of thing you'd like. All right, we'll go ahead and open the rooms. All right, welcome back. We appreciate you being willing to engage with this. We know a few people had to hop off it before the top of the hour, so thank you for the part you were able to talk about. we just would briefly invite you, like, is there anything you'd like to share about the scenario, about what you created, about what you talked about, questions you have, anything like that?
We were talking about the issue of how anonymous the data has to be to avoid identifying people. So, um, should you include, like, if you, especially if you have some really small category like LGBTQIA plus engineers, there's not that many of them. So if there's like one black one in the Southwest, you know who that is. So what kind of things should you make general when you're talking about people? Even though obviously being a person of color would affect their experience, maybe putting that in the data wouldn't be a good idea because you don't want people to know exactly who that person is. So that was a tension we talked about. What kind of things could you maybe make just say the country, even though there is a difference between the regions to avoid
Mm-hmm.
identifying people. So there was some kind of tensions there between how to really represent them and the richness of your data versus not wanting people to know who your participants are.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And that is a very real ongoing kind of tension. And it is the case that sometimes people, when I did my dissertation, I mean, this was a long time ago, but I was I was drawing from a specific cohort of teachers, and the specific cohort had 30 women and 6 men in it, and one of the men ended up being one of the research subjects, and it was the only middle school teacher from that group. And so I made a deliberate choice to just say I'm not revealing the gender of any of the participants because the sample's too small, and did it like that. And the things that they were talking about, it was about mathematical problem solving that they were doing, and none of them reported very particularly gendered experiences. So it didn't feel like erasure to not focus on that aspect. I was focusing more on their own experience in professional development and how that translated to what they did with their students or did not do with their students with mathematical problem solving. But yeah, that's the kind of consideration you need to think about. That if this would be too identifiable, then you've got to go bigger, broader, in some sense.
Know how I found that out the hard way. I was giving like little ethnic groups and stuff for my demographic data, and I did a conference presentation, and there was like one person Scotch Irish from this tiny group, and they were like, somebody was like, "Oh, I know who that is," and I was like, "Oh crap!" So just white, black, that's it. Get rid of all that other stuff. That made it um, less likely they'd figure out who that person was.
Yeah, and like we don't want to erase people's identities, but protecting people is the most important thing. And so when there are small numbers, it's better to just not talk about that characteristic if talking about it would be too identifiable. Did any other groups want to share anything? I've been skimming over what you wrote, and I mean, I think 100% these are all very real scenarios, very plausible that either, I can easily believe this happened or that you knew about this happening or that these are 100% believable in terms of scenarios that people would encounter. And that when you take the time to, you don't have to role play, but, think through the scenarios, discuss them with other people, then when it happens, you're a little bit more equipped to think about what to do about it. And sometimes you can do things that will head off the scenario in the first place, such as not collecting gender data if you don't need that. Go ahead, Sarah.
So I think we talked a little bit about my possible research or my research plan. Since I'm So the idea is to have high school kids participate in a STEM informal science or STEM program. Um, so a professor mentioned the possibility of not having parents sign their consent form because maybe the kids are not out to their parents. So I just wanted to know about that possibility because I I think it would be a possibility, but I don't find it viable for my research. It might make things even harder. So just I don't know, just any comments on that.
Yeah, and I think so. The school districts near where I live would typically not allow us to waive the parent consent form, but we have done things where we named the study very broadly. So it's like, we're just talking about science identity of high school students. You know, you are the parent of a high school student who takes a science class. Therefore, we're asking. And so being very, very broad, that can sometimes be a good approach when you don't want to have to be in the position of outing students to their parents. And it's not lying because you are looking at science identity of high school students. You're just more, you have a narrower interest, but that broader category is still accurate enough for what you're trying to do.
So I wouldn't have to, like on the consent form, I wouldn't have to identify that the group that will be participating in this science program identifies as queer.
Yeah, I would actually, I mean, do not take my advice over whatever your IRB tells you, but I would be inclined to definitely not put that. And I would actually try to argue with my IRB that it would add to the risk for participants if we listed this, and that we're talking about science identity, that's a thing. And so they're being asked because they're a high school student who, can think about science.
And then publishing would be another issue. Like I could publish stating directly the queer experience, even though that wasn't established on the bigger research.
So you'd want to think about that and think about, like, would parents of the students you interviewed potentially see your name and know that this is what it was? Or could you sufficiently mask the experience by not naming like the school, the district, or the city or something in ways that parents wouldn't immediately know that it was their students?
Thank you.
Yeah. Beth, I want to turn it over to you to do our wrap up since we have a 4.5 minutes left.
Indeed. Thanks. Well, we just want to say thank you for spending your some of your summertime with us. We appreciate it, and we love talking with people about this because we love hearing about your experiences, and we always learn from each other. And so we appreciate you spending time with us in this community. Oh yes, and if you're in the Southern Hemisphere, wintertime. So yes, we really appreciate the global experience. That's awesome. Thank you. And so yeah, and we really appreciate NARS providing us the platform and opportunity to be able to connect and not at a conference. So we love our NARS community. So thank you again for being here. If you have any follow-up questions or would like to, talk with us or look for resources, your this session, just the whole group session will be presented, not the small group breakouts. But again, we're always happy to talk with people about these issues and there's a larger group of people that we would also like to acknowledge. So I'll just briefly put up our final slide here because we do want to acknowledge and share. We've had Wendy's shared a couple of these grants with us, and so we just would really love to thank the rest of our team, which includes Dr. Matt Voigt and Renee Kush and Dr. Kelsey Quaisley, Dr. Madison Fitzgerald Russell, Dr. Tim McEldowney, and Dr. John Sutton. And so we have a fabulous team, and our work would not be possible without our fabulous conversations and passionate support of each other. So once again, we really thank you for coming out today and take good care. And we hope to be talking with you again in the future.